Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for pulling up a chair with us again for another Fireside Chat. I've got Annette here with me again. Hi, Annette.
Hi. Good to be here. Always.
I know. We've got more biases to talk about. It feels
really?
like a never-ending list. But what it does is it tells us, man, there are so many places in us and so many mechanisms.
Oh, yes.
Or playgrounds, if you will, for deception. For us to not, that we only see in part. And sometimes when we only see in part, we are misguided and we walk in partial truths and just so many reminders of coming to that place of humility and just owning that we don't see what we don't see. We don't know what we don't know. There's just lots. We all have lots of blind spots. And so humility and grace and all of those things, right? So let me orient the listeners real quick and we'll jump in. Okay, so Annette and I have been on a journey since January about talking about truth, the power of truth. What is reality? What is a true biblical scriptural response to reality? Who is reality? Where are there illusions in our lives and constructs that are fabricated? All of these things, this pursuit of truth. I always think where Jesus is standing before Pontius Pilate, and Pilate's like, what is truth? That's kind of some of the conversations that we're having. And when we set out on this journey, lo and behold, because God is good and the way he does, he gives us things to kind of focus us and focus our conversations. So when we began, there were 3 videos that came across my path. And so I paid attention to them because they caught my attention, and I prayed about them and felt like these 3 videos could kind of organize, if you will, the direction that we go. They're very short. We've only made it through 2, if that tells you anything, since January. The first one is about corruption, and it talks about all the ways, they're secular videos, well done, very short, a brevity to it that's it makes it easy to comprehend. But how corruption operates out there in the world and the different levels and layers of it and how it builds and grows even. Like it might just start with manipulation and there's elements of loyalty and all these different ways that corruption operates and how it's able to operate, and in reality how we can unknowingly be complicit in the continuation of it operating. So those areas of deception. So we started with that, and then as we segued to that, from that to the second video, which is on the Obstacles to Truth Part 1, we've made it through that video in the 3 components, which are cognition, language, and perception, and how those 3 are interconnected to operate within us. So the things that showed up in there was this idea of propaganda, how language can be changed, how language can be used, how perspectives and our perceptions, all of that stuff can be used to propagandize and put us into these thought prisons. So we talked about that. And now, as we were ready to segue from the first video on the Obstacles to Truth, Part 1 to Part 2, this other thing showed up around this list of different biases, which is what really all of that is, our perceptions and all of that is, those are biases that have been created around those things. So where do we have biases, these deeply rooted biases that we aren't even aware of within us? So that's what we've been unpacking for the last, 8 or 9, how many? 7, 8,
it's been a lot.
9.
I think there are like 13, did we decide? And we must be on about 10 or 11.
Yeah, I think we've got today and like 3 more after.
Okay.
So we're pretty deep into it. So I want to orient the listeners to let you know that's the journey we've been on. So if this is your first time jumping into this, you might want to pause and click on the little down arrow to the right of the title of the video, and a description box is going to pop up. In that description box, you're going to find a link to those 2 brief videos I told you about on corruption and obstacles to truth, and the article on propaganda. So you can kind of catch up on the external material that we've been talking around. You'll also find a link to all the conversations that Annette and I have had. So feel free to go peruse those and jump back in. But I just wanted to make sure that you kind of knew the framework that we've been operating from, and just in case we mention something, you'll know what we're talking about, that it's from those materials. So anything else, Annette? Anything else to help orient them?
I think you covered it very nicely. Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah.
It's a lot.
But it's good. I think it's really good, even if they don't listen to all the biases, but to listen to several, at least 2 or 3, to kind of get their minds wrapped around the concept that we're discussing.
Yeah,
it'll make more sense, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's good. And they can go back and catch up at any point in time and listen to it. The biases have been fascinating, and again, because here's a lot of times what we tend to do. We look at others and we look at external, and that's really what happened in the garden, right? It was that blame game. Oh, well, Eve or the woman did this, the serpent did this. It's like that there was something in each of them that allowed them to respond in the way they responded. Right?
Absolutely.
So what these biases have done, it's like, okay, search me, Lord. Where does this bias show up? Because I'm probably, if it's a bias, I'm blind to it. How does it shape my responses, how I perceive things, how I interpret things, how I respond to things? Where is it not accurate? Where are things off?
I think they're almost like a mirror. That's sort of the image I'm getting. Is a bias is a mirror that mirrors back to me a need that I have that needs to be fulfilled and gives rise to the bias. It's a need that is being fulfilled by something other than the truth. And so as we name these biases in the previous conversations, and today we continue, I think that they are to think of them like a mirror. As we identify them, we put a label to it, and we can't just cast them off, because there's something deep within us that allowed us to cling to that bias and call it truth.
Right.
And so our responsibility is before the Lord, okay, let me get back down to the root. I think we've talked about the root many times before. But it's a mirror that we're being invited to mirror back to me, what is it that I need in my life that this bias satisfies? Yeah.
Absolutely. You know what's coming to my mind? I remember, and this was a practicing presence, if I remember right. It's called fault detector. But it's bringing that vision back to my mind, where you've got like this private detective, right? And he's got this, this big, almost cartoonish, a big magnifying glass. When you see him and all you can see is their eye on the other side.
Right.
So he's got this magnifying glass, and in the magnifying glass, it's like fault. It's the word fault. Mm-hmm. So you see the word fault. And so he's looking, and it's kind of like I was saying in the garden. There's, we tend to look outward. So we're looking, and all of a sudden he sees, fault, like all these faults, that show up in his magnifying glass, and he's like, aha. And when he removes the magnifying glass, he's looking in the mirror.
Ah. Wow.
Which made me laugh, but that's what I hear you saying. It's like, okay, let's take these biases, and let's not look through them. Let's use them as a mirror.
Yeah.
To help see where they show up in us. And it just made it, I remember getting that vision, and I just kind of laughed, and then it makes you kind of like the reality of that, like the truth of that. It's because
vivid.
We do.
That's vivid.
Yes. Mm-hmm. We've got to shift, and we've got to. It's this internal glance, this internal look and measure against our standard, which is again the Lord Jesus Christ. So we have this. We've got to lay down some of the mechanisms that we've put up in terms of standards and where we're looking externally, and assess. Allow the Word to assess and evaluate and test us. So the bias that we're going to look at today, and I find this fascinating. It's the catastrophe or normalcy bias, and the way these biases were kind of outlined and defined by Brian McLaren. So I want to give him the credit. And what Brian says is, I remember. This is like us as people. We tend to. So I remember dramatic catastrophes, or could be dramatic improvements, but I don't notice the gradual decline or the gradual improvement. And I would just say, as a coach, that is so true. We miss the movement in either direction.
I think,
especially if it's gradual and it's not, in a moment.
I guess what comes to mind is the thought that sometimes we think we're in a holding pattern, or we're maintaining a status quo, and it's not. That's an illusion. We're either moving forward or we're moving backward. So there is movement. We're very much dynamic. We are not static.
Yes, and sometimes that what's coming to my mind when we're focused on staying comfortable, wanting to remain in our comfort zone, which is kind of the standing still. Everything else is moving. So even when we may feel stationary, things are moving past us. So I can almost see that as well, as that. What I've always said, no decision. Not making a decision is a decision. At some point, the lack of decision becomes a decision. It can very well be made for you. Because everything's in perpetual movement and expand. You know what I mean? Everything is always moving.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to share. I feel like he's having me share a personal example again. But, several years ago, I was in really great shape. I was just a different phase in my life, and I was fit, and I haven't been in the same shape for the last several years. Other things in life have happened and taken priorities, and that's all good and fine. But I remember a couple years ago, I thought, I really wanted to start getting back in shape. Well, what I did, it's so funny when I realized what I was doing. I started with the activity that I ended with when I was in shape.
Oh.
I didn't start with the activity that I started with to get in shape back then. Do you see what I'm saying? That's kind of that an example. As an example, it's like, oh, I've declined.
Yes.
I can't just, because it was gradual. You know, you don't just lose it all like in a day. But in my mind, I remember, you know, that ability of where I ended, but it took me to, you know, like as consistency to get to that point that I just wanted to jump back in. It didn't go well.
No, I am sure not, but I totally relate, Tricia. How foolish we are, but a great illustration that it's almost imperceptible about how we have been moving. In the case of your example, we've been on the decline. We have been thinking we're maintaining, so I can just, now I'm going to just pick it up again where I left off several years ago.
Yeah, it didn't work out too well.
No, ouch.
Oh my gosh, and it's humbling, right? And it's also like, wow, how far, right? How far off I am from, gosh, if I had just maintained it.
Yep.
Now I've got to start back. Like it's like, the realization, I've got to start where I started. I can't start where I ended. Think about the implications of that. And we'll talk about the decline side, then we can talk about the improvement side. But think about the implications of that in our spiritual journey, in our spiritual life. When we, because I'll be honest, like, let's be honest, we can get weary. And so what do we do in that weariness? What do we, like it's such a spiritual parable of, man, if I just maintained it, you know, if I just maintained it.
Right, so because of our weariness, because of our disappointments, the list could go on and on. We kind of pull back and ease up a little bit and make the mistake of thinking that we're maintaining.
Yeah.
And we're not. And it's really a scary thing to honestly think about, especially when you compare that to the illustration that you just gave about the physical part. You have this illusion that you could just pick up where you left off a couple of years ago. And if we feel that way, and then you were in that, you received that rude awakening when you did your exercise routine that you did 2 years ago, the last time you did it, and thought you were ready to break. But look at that. Spiritually, wow, to presume that I am maintaining while I kind of take this break because I'm so tired and, God will understand and all the things we say to ourselves to rationalize. But the loss that is actually taking place, the decline, is potentially frightening to me.
Yeah, I think the thing that's coming to my mind is, I think because, again, going to language, the way we perceive, define, understand, experience rest in the world, like when we get, even in the spiritual sense, when we get weary, and we're like, okay, even scripturally it says, come and rest, right? It talks a lot about rest.
Right.
We trade true rest for what the world would say, well, just take a break, and relax and rest, and, the things, the definitions, the way we would interpret that from the world would be, take a break and just, when in reality, from a spiritual perspective, pushing through will bring us into rest. Learning to rest, learning that our rest, even we can be at rest in Him even when we're weary. But if we back away from the weariness, if we back away because of the weariness to a worldly definition of rest and don't rely on Him to be our rest in the weariness, we never experienced the reality and the truth of spiritual rest. I don't know if that, I would venture to guess that may not make sense to everybody. But, so often we try to define spiritual things with worldly language and worldly definitions, and it doesn't work.
Yes, absolutely. And then we normalize that rest, what we call spiritual rest, but actually we're undergoing our definition and the worldly perspective of what rest is. So now we've normalized that as spiritual rest.
Right. And what we don't realize is because our definition is wrong from a spiritual sense and spiritual growth, there has been a decline as we've rested.
Yeah.
Because we're resting from a worldly perspective. We're resting the way the world would rest instead of pressing in to rest spiritually and letting Him be the source of that rest in spite of and regardless of our weariness.
Another example I think that maybe everyone can relate to is sort of the state and condition of the world around us today, and how over the years, the last number of years, there apparently has been some sort of decline, but we have viewed it as normal. Right. And the decline has been imperceptible to us.
Yeah.
It took, I think, maybe a catastrophe to maybe awaken us of how far we've declined. And I wonder if that happens in the spiritual realm as well, going back to your spiritual illustration, that God in His grace and His mercy will deliver some awakening, some rude awakening, to use that phrase, to awaken us out of our slumber, and that is His grace.
Kind of the thing that's coming to my mind is, I don't know, I'm just going to throw it out there, let's test it, is that catastrophes are only capable, the only way massive catastrophes are capable is from the undergirding of incremental decline. In other words, catastrophes are built on the backbone of one little decline, imperceptible decline after imperceptible decline after imperceptible decline, you have a catastrophe. If you really unpack the catastrophe and not just look at which is what we typically do, we just look at the catastrophe, we don't notice, do we ever really dissect, okay, what was the cause of that? Well, it was this and this and this, and they went completely unnoticed, but made the way for the catastrophe.
Absolutely. That's really good, Tricia. It reminds me of, in preparation for our conversation today, I've been meditating on several verses, and one of them was in Ephesians, where we were exhorted to walk circumspectly. So if we're paying attention and discerning and walking aware, we are less likely to fall prey to the diminishment or the decline and therefore possibly stall or in some way impede the catastrophe from occurring.
Mm-hmm.
But our tendency to normalize and to just kind of maintain, thinking we're maintaining status quo, it blinds us. Yeah. So as Christians, though, we're exhorted to stay wide awake, to keep our eyes open, to know the times and the seasons, so those catastrophes won't have to happen.
Yes. And I think,
too, it's our mandate.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, they won't have an environment in which a catastrophe can take place.
Right. And I think too, we're mandated when we do see those who have the eyes to see the decline and stuff. We're to somewhat let people know, right? Mm-hmm. Because. Well, I just think of all the prophets, that try to warn, but people want to stay so much in that normalcy, like our propensity to not even hear or heed a warning. Yeah. That's like, if anything, the prophets and the way they were treated is exactly this. It's exactly this. I want to stay in my normalcy bias. And not see the things that you're noticing. I don't want to give place for them. I don't want to try to see them myself. I don't want to heed that. And therefore, things continue to, you have people that can see it, and those that don't want to leave their normalcy bias. But we are as believers, like you said, we're mandated to walk circumspect. We are mandated to be awake and be aware, and seek the truth in the times and the seasons, and be watchful. So it's. I
think of Noah. You're alluding to the prophets, Noah, who is warning the people, and then look at how few paid attention. Very few.
Right.
And so that gives you some indication of our tendency as a human being is to just stay in our comfort zone.
Yeah.
What life is normal. We're everything's going okay. Whatever you're saying, Noah, is a bunch of hogwash.
Yeah. And it makes me think too. We talked about this at some point about the frog in the pot where the water keeps getting hotter. But we were born into the pot. Like, I have no idea how hot that pot was. Like, whatever the temperature was at the point in time that I was born into it felt normal to me. For all I know, by the time I was born into that pot of water, it was so far removed from God's normal, but it was normal to me. That's so good. Where I started was already not normal from a kingdom perspective. So our wanting to stay in this normalcy bias already puts us at a place that's removed from God's normal, which is what He created in the Garden of Eden. And we don't know how far we were born, how far it was when we were born into it.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
We should be swimming against the current to get back to His normal instead of desiring our own normal. It should be His normal.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that illustration kind of puts me on a heightened alert of our that we don't know how far gone we are, but that we call that normal from kingdom perspective. So I have to be even more aware that I must walk circumspectly. I must have my ears open and my eyes open to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, too, to go the other direction. Like, so we've talked about the decline and the catastrophe, but if we go the other direction, in terms of improvement, in terms of growth, man, growth can be almost imperceptible. And honestly, when God is doing a work and maybe pruning someone's life or our life, it may feel like not growth. It may feel less than growth. Like we tend to miss even the smallest improvements. We're in ourselves or in other people. Like when we're wanting to accomplish something, and again, as a coach who really tries to create momentum and movement in people's lives toward what their goal is, what their view of their fulfilling, satisfying life is. Well, we're here now, and that's there, and there's movement from here to there. If we don't stop along the way and intentionally notice the movement that we've made, the improvement we've made, we lose heart. Because we're waiting for that. We're waiting for that, and when that hasn't shown up yet, then all we see is that we're not there yet. That all we see is that big thing that I'm aiming at hasn't shown up in my life yet. Well, no, but look where you are now from where you started, and that's the part that we can overlook and lose courage, lose heart. So that's important too. I love those moments when the Lord kind of turns me around and shows me what He's just completed, what's been accomplished, because we can not notice it.
Right.
And we cannot notice it in other people's lives either when we're anxious for people to change. We can miss the movement.
I think we tend to think of it as we're looking for an event and not movement, and that's where we miss it, because we're looking for an event. We're looking for the outcome to be one event, when in fact it's a process. Yeah.
And the journey really is the event. But the word that's been tumbling around in me for, like, I've continued to have it before the Lord, is this word mundane. Consistent, gradual movement is mundane.
Yeah.
And yet it's movement, and it's to be celebrated, and but especially, oh my gosh, in our day and age and in the Western world and in our culture, everything's grandiose and big and shiny, and like it can throw us in that trap, and where we get discouraged or judgmental of other people. Like we don't see the growth. We don't notice the process that they're in and honor the process that God has them in. And celebrate the movement and continue to encourage. Stay with it. There's more. Stay with it. We're just not great at that. And I think it's because of these biases.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I hear people say, well, nothing is happening. And we generalize these sweeping generalizations because we don't see the anticipated event or outcome. And so we get, grandiose even in our statements of sweeping generalizations. And that is we undermine the process in our thinking.
Absolutely.
I think of also, I think of Noah, Moses, who is out for 40 years. We don't hear too much about what happened in those 40 years.
Right. Yeah.
But obviously there was movement, and God was doing something.
Yeah.
To, at the end of the 40 years, to call him into being the leader of his people out of bondage.
Yeah.
So there must have been, it was a slow 40-year process, which really speaks to the patience and the slow work sometimes that the incline is. But there is a positive forward moving process taking place. So I'm just encouraging myself in that, Tricia.
Yeah. That is so fascinating, because what it has me thinking is the Bible is really kind of silent on, well, there was Paul for 14 years before he was brought to Antioch. Jesus, until he was, like, we hear one little blip when he's a teenager, but for the most part, his developmental years before he stepped onto the scene, if you will, Moses, as you just, like, the Bible is really silent on the each individual's process, which makes me really, it's that sacred. The Lord wasn't even going to reveal his unique individual process with each of those people, because everyone's different. Here's what we do. We'd make a pattern out of it. We try to replicate that. It's so sacred. It's so unique. It's so what, but the flip side of that is we see things two-dimensionally. So we see Moses did something. The next thing we see is he's on the scene doing this. So because there's that gap in our mind, it is instantaneous, because we flip the page and there he is. Yeah. We flip the page and now Jesus is there in a minute. We flip the page and now Paul is in ministry, but the process that was so sacred, God chose to have that hidden and confidential and sacred to him, between him and the individual. It's not out there, because we, like I said, we in our humanity would make a program out of it. Yeah. Because that's what we do.
Absolutely.
And so, I just think about what is that statement? It's kind of like we said, catastrophes are built on these incremental, imperceptible declines. The same thing is true of success, or it's built on incremental, almost unperceivable failures, but extracting the learning. Like, it's just like nothing's a failure if you've learned from it. So it's that process of the incremental movement and the learning process, and I learn another thing from this, and I learn another, and before you know, all of a sudden, you're a success.
Yeah.
The people that see the success didn't see, and sometimes we can miss we're so focused on the end thing that we don't realize, I've learned a new thing. And all of those are building the platform for the thing to sit on.
That's right.
That others will see. And so we can get discouraged. And whether it's either direction, we have this ability to not see it, to not see the minutia, the mundane, we miss it.
That's good, Tricia.
Well, we need to be celebrating the journey. We need to be we need to be better noticers, right? That walking circumspectly, awake, aware, seeing, noticing, in ourselves, obviously, in others. I would put it this way: let me be concerned in myself of the decline, and let me be aware and noticing in others the movement forward and encouraging that. We don't tend to do it that way. We tend to want to nitpick everyone else apart and pat ourselves on the back. I'm saying reverse it.
Exactly. And the important thing is, again, that we are in movement. We have to acknowledge we are in movement. The question is, are we forward? Are we back? Are we going backward? Because we're sliding one way. We are moving one way or another. There is no normal in the sense that it's status quo or maintaining. Absolutely.
It's really important. It's really important. Now, with all of these biases, there was a separate thread that kind of responded to each of them, wanting to give maybe some practical things to think about. So if you're okay, let's shift gears to that and see what this person says and what might come up. So, so this person wrote, I think this is pretty normal human behavior. I think so too. I would concur. So they say, learn to find significance in the little things in a moment. Look for those things, which is kind of that's being aware. So they give an example. They say, for example, when I see a tree, I don't see a tree. I experience the fact that I will be dead and that tree will likely still be here after I'm gone. What does that say about reality and about life? All of a sudden, a normal thing becomes a transcendent moment and likely one of personal growth. Mm-hmm. So I always think of, and I'm not great at this all the time, but I'm like, all of life is a parable.
Mm-hmm. Amen. I agree.
So what am I extracting and learning about myself, about God, about others, about His divine creation and plan and beyond me, right? All of a sudden I'm not the center anymore, and I can see, I love that example. I'm going to be dead. The tree's still going to be here. What can I learn from
great.
that?
Yeah,
you know?
And I think it points to the need for us to learn to notice, which I guess is being circumspect. It's to notice.
Yeah.
Our moments. Don't just walk through them, passively engaged with what's going on, like you're asleep.
Yeah.
To notice. And how is God speaking to us in this moment? That's noticing how he's interacting with me, what he's saying about me, what he's saying about himself in this moment. So we have to notice. I guess what I'm trying to find different words, but I'm still thinking, we have to be awake. We have to be paying attention. All those words still apply. That's.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting this phrase to cultivate your noticer. Cultivate it. We have to cultivate. Like it doesn't just happen, right? We have to cultivate that in us to be good noticers. To notice life. Notice it. Notice movement. Notice. Like I said, to me, all of life is a parable. The Lord can use anything and everything to speak to us and to teach us and to impart wisdom to us.
I agree.
So.
I agree. I think that one of the first times as she was teaching me about noticing how life is a parable, I like the way you put that, was years and years ago, our family took a vacation in Florida. And so that was many states away from where we lived. And we went on this particular beach. It was sort of a desolate beach. We went down this little road just to see where is this going to go, and we discovered this little quiet beach. And we met at that beach my pastor and his family. They were the only other people there. we didn't even know they were on vacation, let alone that they were vacationing in Florida as we were. And my question, I was just so amazed about the, quote, coincidence. I noticed that, God, where are you in this seeming coincidence? What are you telling me about you in this coincidence? And I think that was sort of the experience that I recall that sort of launched me into noticing that around me and how God orchestrates things. It was such a powerful lesson. I'll just never forget it. We often just chalk it up to coincidence, but no, God was saying something to me. And so I'm always looking for the moments where he's saying something to me through whatever's happening in my moments.
Yeah, yep. And I love when it's so, like sometimes it feels like that is like, what are the odds? Like sometimes it's like, so, like, what are the odds that it is his, it's like a wake up. It's like he's saying, hey, I'm here.
Totally.
Pay attention, right?
Yeah.
So when we have those moments, and the stronger, the more not random, but like, what are the odds? Like the odds are so against anything like that ever happening. It's an opportunity to begin to notice and pay attention, and I think that it's what he's always trying to get us to do. Is like your phrase, wake up, notice, I'm here. I'm trying to show you things. I'm trying to speak to you. I'm trying to have a relationship with you. I'm trying, you know, like, and I love when he's that loud. To me, that's loud.
Me too.
You know, and so his goal is to draw us into utter stillness, to where even his silence is perceivable to us.
Yeah.
But we have to start with, you know, loud. I started with loud. It was like, oh my gosh, you know. Sometimes I miss that. Sometimes I miss the loud. I'm like, oh, could you just speak English instead of mystery? But
amen.
But he's just. But even that, you know, I can now. I notice the movement from loud to still, and how he did that. Like there's been movement, and I can see it, and I can notice it, and I can observe it. And I always think of that scripture: "Don't despise small beginnings." We don't need to despise what feels like minutia and mundane, but the almost imperceivable step by step. Because the truth is I can't get from here to there without each little step.
Yeah.
So.
Amen. It reminds me of the phrase, tending the holy. And you and I have had a conversation around this a long time ago. But each moment is tending the holy. We're invited to tend the holy. The question is, will we? Because sometimes it is imperceptible, but each moment is sacred. And there is movement in the mundane. We know that as we tend the holy.
Yeah. Nothing is, again, it's all holy when it's done unto the Lord. And he's everything is available to him. There's nothing he cannot or will not use. In his relationship with us for our growth and for our benefit. And
Amen. And at the risk of just kind of going off on a different tangent, it saddens me when I hear people talk about killing time or expressing boredom. Because in that, because again, circling back to, we're either forward moving or we're backward moving.
Yeah.
And in that sentiment, you're doing one or the other according to what you choose and how you tend the holy and pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that that's so much this whole in our world and in our culture and our society, boredom, because we're so inundated with the fast and the flashy and the boredom is a real issue. And I know that one of the conversations that Kim and I had in the past, it's several Fireside Chats ago. Maybe I'll add that link as just a side note for anyone that wants to listen to it. We did a Fireside Chat on peace is boring.
That's right.
And just why is that? It shouldn't be. Like, why? To help us understand again the things that how we've been shaped and formed by our culture, by our world at the point we were born into this boiling pot. What's normal to us, again, is so far from what's normal to him that to us, at least to me, when I walked through that, I kept asking him, is peace boring? Like it felt boring. And so there's just a lot that has to be unraveled within us to really grasp what his heart's longing and desire for us is and what is normal according to his definition, not ours. And so I'll try and remember to just add a little link to that particular
That's good.
Fireside Chat, just if anyone's interested in the notion that peace is boring, because it's that plays into this whole bias. So there might be some nuggets in that conversation as well.
And maybe you want to make a distinction between mundane and boredom. Something being mundane versus something being boring might kind of feel the same.
Yeah, mundane can feel boring, but mundane is mundane in and of itself. So boring can stem from anything, from a lack of the same old, the lack of anything to do, what can feel like nothing, like not having the flashy, the things that satisfy the soul the way that the soul is used to being satisfied. Mundane is just the same old, day in, day out. So it's like nothing changes, which we can fall into. There can be incremental improvements that we're not noticing, which can make everything feel mundane. Kind of like that Groundhog's Day. I don't know if you ever saw that movie, Groundhog's Day.
Yes.
That. And, he kind of goes bonkers there for a while. He goes crazy and does, because it's like, oh, my gosh, here it's, But even when things feel like maybe they're cycling back around and you're in the same place you were before, if you've allowed the Lord to work each time around, or each time something's revisited, then you've made progress.
Amen.
Sometimes the Lord moves us through cycles instead of just a straight line, and we've got to notice. I love that. Yeah, that cultivating and becoming good noticers. Noticing is a big deal. And we need to notice for one another. We, as body, as people in the body, we need to be good noticers for one another, again, to encourage and help people see the movement and see the growth and see what God's doing. Sometimes other people can see the process that the Lord has us in better than we can see it. Like when we're in it, when I'm in a process, I don't see it. I never see it till the other side. But other people who have been in a process can maybe give us insights and encourage us for where we are and where the Lord has us. And then really be good at noticing our own decline. And don't try to start where you stop. last time. Let me tell you, it doesn't go well. I'm like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? I'm like, because he's like, yeah, you can't start where you stopped. You have to start where you started.
Yeah.
And you just want to go, duh, of course. But that's just like you just feel like you've not lost any ground. You're just going to start again.
Right.
Okay, go back to the beginning. Oh my gosh.
Go to the back of the line. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So, it's been so good. So good. Do you have any other thoughts that you want to tell us today?
Yeah. No? This has been delightful. Thank you. Good insight.
Yeah, it's been good. I've enjoyed these biases because it's I love that there's language around them, and definition around them, and it helps with the mirror. It really does.
Totally.
So,
fun.
Yeah, thank you as always. It's always
thank you.
A delight. Yeah. Well, I want to thank the listeners. I'm so grateful again that you continue to show up and pull up a chair and join us. Would love to hear feedback, things that you're learning, things that stand out to you, things that challenge you. Would love to hear any feedback. And if you feel anyone would be blessed by any of these insights, feel free to share them. So I don't think I have anything else. I just want to bless everyone, and I look forward to our next Fireside Chat. I think we've got 3 more biases to discuss and unpack. So we will be here the next time with another one to look at. And until then, we just bless you. Bye for now.